Good morning, good afternoon, and good evening, everyone. This is Ghostipedia, and welcome back to another episode of GregTech New Horizons, Stellar Hell. You doing good? I'd hope so. Now, before we start to dive any deeper into this episode, let's talk about the buffs and debuffs that you guys have given me for episode 2. The first to win was 100%ing the quest book tier of the LV Age before ending the episode. Now, this does not mean that I can't complete other quests in other chapters, it just means I have to have the entire LV chapter finished before we can move on to episode 3. Second up, you guys have completely removed my ability to use the healing axe for episode 2. This will really just mean that we'll be eating more food instead of using a healing axe instead for longer trips throughout the world. Thirdly, you guys have given me a pretty rough one here. I'm gonna have to research every single warped research that I see on any Thaumcraft page that I scroll to. Now, you could argue that I would have to research every single warp node that's already active, but when you have a default Thaumonomicon, there's already some exposed, and I don't think that would be in the essence of the challenge that I was initially going for. This is going to run off of an honor system, otherwise it would be very easy for me to cheese. Meaning, I will be fully transparent with the pages that I flip to in the Thaumonomicon for the entirety of this episode. No positive modifiers were used this episode, so let's dive right into what I did in the LV Age. I was starting to get pretty hungry a lot more often than before due to the fact that I was running all over the place collecting resources. So I wanted to upgrade our farms and bring them underground, but I needed more greatwood, so we head out to explore to find a greatwood tree. And on the way over to one, I end up finding a hollow hill from Thaumcraft, and I get nosy and I poke around in it. Thankfully, the mobs in there weren't too bad, and I was able to get to the chest. There was some interesting stuff, mostly food in there, which I ended up taking and then promptly forgetting about everything else. I usually don't take the metal ingots unless there's something that's difficult to craft, generally because they're an inventory clogger, and my inventory gets totally out of hand. Anyway, after getting the greatwood, I head back home and I start to clear out areas for the walls for each of these farm plots. I'm basically going to be setting up a small little grow bed for each garden early on, and once we've figured out a more reliable cycle of food, and when we're no longer grinding for hearts, we will switch most of these grow beds over to a particular selection, rather than just being a hodgepodge of everything. Now, one of the things that I really like about the little design for these grow beds I'm going with are actually the anti-blocks that we're using in the ceiling. They let off this nice luminous sort of bloom, which makes them look really nice as kind of a light that helps these plants grow while we're underground. I even go as far as adding in some extra slopes so the ceiling isn't too flat, because I did make this kind of compact, as I didn't really see much of a reason in adding a large ceiling. Now that the general design is done, I add in the dirt, as well as start moving the crops in, so we now have all of our crops underground, which means one potential of death removed. Besides when I need to maybe harvest cotton from the surface garden and or cutting the spruce cube down with Agatha Christie. Now that the gardens have been sorted away, the next thing I wanted to work on was a couple more LV machines. Specifically, the low voltage assembler, as this would allow us to get access to a lot of recipes that are super useful and more efficient than some of the ones that we've been having to manually craft up until now. Now, the assembler requires 2 new LV components that we haven't made yet. The LV conveyor belt and the LV robot arm. The LV conveyor belt isn't too bad, as it really only requires some rubber sheets, 2 motors, and a single cable. The one that is a little bit more annoying is the robot arm, as the robot arm requires 3 motors in total, which one of those is made into a piston, and an LV circuit. So it increases the circuit cost of any machine that a robot arm is used in. That's why I ended up making 4 circuits a little bit ago, so we can make the assembler and not have to make these circuits any more inefficiently than we already have before. This is probably one of the most important machines in the LV Age, bar a large multi-block that we'll be making later. Now, this is a bit awkward. To actually use the assembler, we need 2 more machines, but the most important one right now is the fluid extractor. This also requires a new component, the LV pump, which is kind of annoying to make, but they'll get easier as things go on. With our first LV pump crafted, we were able to finish the basic fluid extractor and complete a quest. As I mentioned before, the basic fluid extractor will allow us to make some of the circuit components that we've been working on a lot easier. The main one being vacuum tubes. They are still a bit annoying, but they're better than they were before at least. With vacuum tubes out of the way, we can now start working on a centrifuge. This is a more circuit-heavy machine than any of the other ones, so I wanted to make the vacuum tube cost as cheap as possible, as that's one of our biggest sinks of steel right now. This reduces the cost of steel per vacuum tube by half, which is awesome. Now speaking of steel, all hands on deck because we're running very low on it. So I think it's finally time that we make another bricked blast furnace and attach it to the one that we currently have. Unfortunately, I sorely misunderstood how slow these things would be. The biggest thing holding us back on making more brick blast furnaces was the gypsum, surprisingly. We had a bunch of everything else. Thankfully, the iron furnaces from before were cheaper to craft due to the assembler. I assembled the controller for our second BBF and started to assemble it all directly attached to our first one. This is a mechanic known as wall sharing, which we won't be really using too much from this point here on out, but for the BBF, it's a really huge time saver. I personally don't like wall sharing, so I probably won't be doing it too much after this point, as I don't think it looks aesthetically pleasing. Yes, I know this will be a lot more resources, we just won't think about it. Now that our steel production is faster, we're also going to need faster charcoal production. So I prep up some food, as we're about to head out to go and mine up a bunch of sand and clay for more coke bricks. The sand was insanely easy, as I just went back to our spawn and started digging wherever the hell I felt like. There was plenty of sand, and I grabbed almost about an inventory's full. I real quickly dropped that off back home, and then went out and started mining up the clay that we would need. I didn't get as much as the sand that I did earlier, mainly because you need less of it. And I totally forgot that there's a better recipe now that we have steam machines. Oops. It's not a huge issue though, they're still pretty cheap. Now, to cook up all these coke bricks, we actually started to invest in some nether furnaces. They're a little bit faster than regular furnaces and also double the fuel efficiency, meaning each creosote bucket now smelts a stack of items, which is really awesome. I then took those coke oven bricks and started to assemble our extra coke ovens behind our present boiler. Now, to actually make use of all the coke ovens that we now have, we're going to need some piping to properly route the wood around into the coke ovens and to get it back out. So I started to process down some tin plates, as you can see here. They take a really long time in comparison to all the other ingots, which I find quite funny because I thought tin was a soft metal. Anyway, I ended up adding the pipes which handled the wood input. I then had to wait for more tin plates. And then finally, I started to add the smaller pipes which would handle the charcoal output. And also ended up connecting the hoppers that were needed for the output, as well as wrenched them all together. Now every coke oven is now auto-outputting into this drawer, and we can input wood into the drawer to the left, which is awesome. We now have a source of automated charcoal. After stocking up the automated charcoal production, I decided it was time to go to the Twilight Forest. The quick and dirty portal generator is just made out of some circuits and a diamond, so it wasn't really that hard. Anyway, we went to the Twilight, and it wasn't really that eventful. I more or less just explored around. I found some lead veins. I got trolled a couple of times by ore veins just not even spawning. That was pretty interesting. I didn't know that that could happen. I ended up finding another silver vein. This one was really close to the surface, and both silver veins were close to our spawn, so that was really nice. We more or less found what we needed. And I ended up finding one of these abandoned house structures. I dug underneath it to see if there was a chest, and the Amungler Siege struck again. We ended up finding some void metal in this chest, which, from what chat told me, was pretty rare, as I was streaming during this time rather than recording by myself. That is one thing I would also like to quickly clarify. I don't just stream this. I do play by myself, so these are kind of a mixture between an episode, stream highlights, and my own recounts of my own adventures through this pack, which is why I do most of my audio in post, rather than speaking to you guys while I'm directly in game. It's easier and it allows me to direct a narrative, which I think you guys enjoy much more. But don't worry, I also do plan to be integrating live commentary in while I'm working on things in game as I get better. So look forward to that. Anyhow, back to the Twilight now. We ended up finding a Naga boss arena, and I ended up making short work of it with the Pan of Doom. I really didn't get into any risky situations here, as the Naga is an extremely easy fight, and I had lifesteal on my Pan. And with a lot of extra bonus hearts, it was completely trivialized. Now with the Naga dead, we head back out to go and explore more. We stopped by a couple more of these ruined homes. They didn't have anything in them, and then my game crashed. Whoops. I sent this crash report to a GTNH developer, and she mentioned that, well, it's not an issue with Optifine, so you don't have to worry about that. It's apparently a bug with the Twilight Forest. However, not to risk anything, as soon as I loaded back into my world, I decided it was time to head home and teleported out of the Twilight Forest, as I didn't want to risk this crashing again while I was playing. Thankfully, we got home in a single piece with no other issues occurring. Now, exploring the Twilight taught me one really important thing. Our gear was not cut out for exploration. We're missing a hang glider, which requires some bound leather. That's made from woven cloth, string, and leather combined in a crafting table. This then needs to be hung up on a wall to dry into tanned leather. We'll be able to make this easier in the future, but it's required for the hang glider, so we have to make it now. Now, the hang glider only requires 2 of that special leather, as you saw in the middle of the recipe there, so I decided to use the extra tanned leather that we got to make ourselves a backpack. This should help keep our inventory a little bit cleaner from here on out. After prepping up the last of the materials needed for the hang glider, we finally got it. This will allow us to move just that little bit faster while exploring. With a backpack and hang glider, I think we're ready to focus on machines again. And first up on the list of machines that we would like to get, the first one would be a centrifuge. Now, for some reason I never took it out of the crafting table in this clip, but let's explain why the centrifuge is good. We can take purple congealed slime and get rubber and refined glue from it, which are both really useful products for us. Some of you earlier might have noticed the assembler recipes having fluids in them. You may have caught on that several of them require glue in the crafts themselves. So with the centrifuge, we finally have these unlocked, which is a huge advantage to us because the handcrafting recipes are abysmal. Now, while I was working on prepping up a bunch of materials for more circuits, I ended up accidentally claiming the glue quest, which gave us a free LV bag. That's at least the reward that I took. You could have taken the sticky resin or the empty cells, but I decided to go with the LV bag because minor gambling addictions moment, but we got some red alloy. Anyhow, back to preparing some of the components for circuits. I was working on making the circuit boards in an assembler, which required some copper foil and wooden plates, but in my almighty wisdom, I didn't check the circuit recipe in NEI, ended up using the wrong one, so we ended up making some wooden fluid pipes at first, but we had more to spare, so I just threw them in, and it was a-okay. Now, while the circuit boards were crafting, I was prepping up the materials for the resistors, as that would be the next component that we would need to make. And as you can see, resistors also require glue, copper wires of various types, and coal dust in an assembler still. We just get more of them per craft now, which is wonderful. Now, one thing I did not notice is how much glue resistors use in their craft. They use quite a bit. So I was waiting around on glue a little bit more than I would have initially liked at first. So, while I was waiting for glue to be spun out of our slime, I kept buying red alloy cables, because I'm not going to make those myself when I can easily buy them from the GTNH shop. We'll just say it was an editor's choice to not show anything else about resistors and totally not record the circuit crafting. Yep, Anyhow, now that we have a bunch of circuits, I wanted to start producing light fuel, which is our next goal. So what better way of doing that than doing it half asleep on a stream? So pretty much, we first started off by making a basic combustion generator. This is going to power our remote oil well that we're going to be using to tap into a giant oil spout. There were a couple of them nearby spawn, so I've decided to select this one here. I set up a little platform around the oil spout itself, hooked up our pump and our combustion generator, got a couple of pipes in place, and boom, that's oil more or less done. Well, except for one thing. We have to give the basic pump some mining pipes so it can actually drill up the oil. Once that's done, it will end up in this low voltage fluid tank, which will be compacted away into the fluid cells that I just put in there. So, after claiming this area, so nothing bad happens to it, I head back home and actually start to focus on turning that oil into something usable. We already have the machines ready, we needed a basic distillery and a chem reactor, but our goal is light fuel. To get light fuel, we're going to need sulfuric light fuel, which comes from distilling down the oil that we're getting. Now, this won't be too bad to set up. First off is the distillery, and then right beside it we put our chemical reactor, followed by a tank to store our outputs. The chemical reactor as well as the distillery both output to their left side. Now, after crafting some more basic combustion generators to power our oil setup, I placed those down and wired them up properly. These two engines will provide enough energy to let this system run uninterrupted, which is wonderful for us. Now, that system needs some oil to run, so I head over to our oil well and steal some of the oil cells that have been batching up in the meantime while we were setting it up initially, and I threw it in to start processing it. We are now producing sulfuric light fuel. We're going to need some hydrogen to be able to purify this into its pure form, which is much more fuel potent. Now, how are we going to get hydrogen, you must ask? Well, we're going to get it from yellow limonite dust. We can spin the limonite dusts around in a centrifuge with some empty cells to produce oxygen and hydrogen. It'll take a little bit of time, but once it's done, we'll have a nice little stockpile for our initial oil setup. Now, we can't make it into light fuel right away, as we need 48 buckets of the sulfuric stuff to complete one of the quests that we need to beat one of the challenges that have been assigned to this episode. So, for the time being, I've just been leaving the cells on top. And we've been using some of the fuel that we got from a quest reward to keep this thing running, as we haven't been able to make any light fuel yet because of what I just mentioned. I then proceed to have the biggest skill issue of all history, and kill the recording. I got the light fuel needed, and I also moved our LV machines closer to our oil production, just so we had everything a little bit closer to our power generation for the time being. I am not human, but I still make mistakes. Now, while I was working around on random things throughout the base, I was also preparing up a bunch of ingredients for some circuits, which I ended up crafting almost a half a stack of them. I was a little bit short on resistors. I'll make the rest later. I ended up making a compressor, and I thought it was time to start working on the EBF. Now, there's a lot of work to get done before we can actually assemble the EBF, and one of those things is making an arc furnace. And to get that, we're going to need a few more things. The first thing on the list was a canning machine, but the quests were locked behind battery holes, so I head back to the Twilight and grab one of those cryolite veins from before. We're going to need the cryolite anyway to get aluminium smelted up here in the future, but for now we really only need it for the lead, which I smelt up in the background and don't even bother showing. We've seen enough ingot smelting as it is. Next up, we're going to need this antimony to unlock the second half of the quest. We actually already had this from some of our nether mining, so I didn't even bother including a clip of going and getting more, as we already had it. Now, all that's left to do is to put the components together, which is a bit of battery alloy and tin wire with a odd variety of tools next to it. Eventually we'll be able to do this in assembler, but for now we have to use this recipe in particular. And there's our battery holes. Sweet! Next up on the stuff that we need for a arc furnace is a LV electrolyzer. We need a way to get carbon, and we could probably spin it out of the centrifuge, but having a LV electrolyzer on hand for other separations of materials will also be a good thing. So I quickly create one of those and slap it down over on our electrical cables. After getting ourselves a graphite cell using the canner, we were able to finally produce a arc furnace. It's a little power hungry, so we need to have a battery inside of it, and it needs to be close to our generators, but this allows us to make wrought iron so much easier than before. So much so that we quickly hammer out a forming press, a mixer, and an alloy smelter, finally. All three of these machines are really important for us, and I'll explain more why later on. In the meantime, I decided to stock up my lunchbox, as 2.4 has hit, and now we have a new nutrition mod. Depending on how balanced your diet is, you will gain various buffs. So eating a wide variety of healthy foods will make us a lot more safe. With our lunchbox stocked up, I went out and mined some mica. Brought that home, threw it in our steam macerator, and then proceeded to make a forge hammer to process the crushed stuff much faster. I ended up also doing the exact same thing for nickel, but I'm not going to repeat myself again. Now we're in the home stretch for the EBF, so I think it's time that we start working on it. The first thing that we need to do is make the cupronickel coils, which take cupronickel wire and mica insulator foil. We've made both of these before, so we already have them on hand. Now, mica insulated foil is a little bit of a multi-step process, so I'll explain that and let you understand how they were made right now. The first thing to do is to take mica dust and raw rubber dust, mix it together, and get mica-based pulp. This then has to be forming pressed with a bit of asbestos dust to make mica-based sheets. We then take those mica sheets and alloy smelt them together with some sort of quartz dust. In this case, we ended up using nether quartz. We can then take those mica insulator sheets and bending machine them to get mica insulator foil. We can then use those foils to produce our coils within a basic assembly machine. So I wait until those are finished and then set them up behind our current LV machines, as this is going to be the home of our first EBF. Next up, producing Invar. This is a combination between iron and nickel in an alloy smelter. This is going to have to be processed down into heat-resistant casings, as these are the core blocks for the EBF besides the coils. I ended up having to make more than I initially planned, so one of the spare ones went to making the EBF's main controller. It says that the quest is completed, but we're still missing a few things here. One of those things being the muffler hatch. It's useless because we have pollution off, but it's needed for the multi anyway. Next up is the input and output bus. They're the exact same recipe, the only difference is one is circuit 1 and one is circuit 2. Next up, I need some lubricant, so I take some creosote oil and start to distill that down. We then use that lubricant along with a few electric pumps to make our LV energy hatches. We need 2 of these to run the EBF, as every recipe in the EBF requires MV power. Oh, and we also need a maintenance hatch, but they're very easy to make. Next up, rather than being a sane individual, I decided to run a massive lead pipe across my base. Honestly, this is what happens when you have no sleep and you're playing GregTech in the middle of the night. We're just not going to talk about it. What we are going to talk about is that I realized that one tube would not cut it. So I had to make a second one. With both of those pipes connected to the steam turbines behind our EBF, it was barely, and I mean barely enough to get us there. Between the buffer in the boiler and our fluid pipes themselves, they basically acted as just enough of a buffer to make one, and I only mean one, single aluminum ingot. Please do not ever mimic this. This was the dumbest thing that one person could have ever done. Now, around this point, we hit 5,000 subscribers, as well as we were growing pretty fast on Twitch as well. Thank you so much, guys. I'm really grateful that I'm able to entertain you all, as that's really why I do this. I find it fun to entertain people. So I decided that we would do a 12-hour long stream on a complete whim. And oh my god, was that a mistake. Before stream, I decided that we would be doing a lot of Thaumcraft to start off with, which meant exploring the world to find aura nodes that we could tap to fill up our first starter wand. This thing's super inefficient. Next, I came back home and I started to work away at some of the researches that I'd need, including taking all the warp research on pages that I opened, as that's one of the challenges for this video. And unfortunately during that, I decided to do a stupid, which was finish Magic Fungar, and then I opened up its page and had to take 2 more warp researches, which I ended up finishing shortly afterwards. Now for this next clip, I want you to listen very closely. We are now doped up on warp effects. As you can see, I just laid an egg, which is one of the effects of warp. The other one that I showed you was one of the headache sound effects. They get worse up to the point of even spawning a wither in your base, so we're trying to keep our warp pretty low this episode. And we're going to find ways to deal with that warp in future videos very effectively. Now, the next thing that I wanted to work on was a permanent source of oxygen for our EBF as well as for use around the base. So one of the first things I did is I ran out and I restocked up our iron and copper supply by going to this chalcopyrite vein. It would have been really awkward if we ran out of resources mid-crafts. We brought it home, we threw a large majority of it into our steam grinder, and then sent the crushed stuff through our forge hammer. I don't know why I washed it, as it just went straight into a furnace afterwards rather than doing anything special with it, but I mean, it's not like it was really expensive to do anyway. Next up, on getting our oxygen system online, we need more circuits, so I focus on making the parts needed for them, as well as make about a dozen, and a little extra. Next up, I use our arc furnace to create a handful more wrought iron ingots, so we can produce a few more machines. One of those being a sifting machine, a centrifuge, a LV macerator, a LV chemical reactor, and a LV electrolyzer. We then go over to one of the walls in our base and we place down the machines in a particular order. I'll explain how that works right now. Hey, alright, let's explain how this line works in game. First off, we have a basic rock breaker back here with some lava and water by it. Oh, hey, Among Us just leveled up. Cool. Okay, anyway, we have this basic rock breaker here, which takes this lava and water and turns it into cobblestone. This cobblestone is then moved through this tin pipe up here to this rock breaker, which takes the cobblestone and turns it into gravel. The gravel is then sent automatically via the auto output mode to the left to this sifter. Ignore the fact that it has some like emeralds in it. I was doing some stuff on the side. Anyway, we then take this gravel and it gets sifted. It takes about 30 seconds and then it goes to the macerator to be shredded down into flint dust. That flint dust is then taken and put in a centrifuge to become silicon dioxide, which then we react with magnesium. This stuff over here is by default magnesium. It's reacted with our silicon dioxide here. You see 3 to 2, and you get 1 raw silicon and 4 magnesia. That magnesia is then sent over to this basic electrolyzer, where it's then split down into oxygen gas and the magnesium again. This isn't working right now because our storage of oxygen is already full, so there's no reason for this thing to run, so this part of the setup does not work, at this time at least. This entire setup here is what's producing our oxygen for our EBF over here, so we can produce steel as well as use it to run recipes faster. There's a pipe that goes under the floor all the way across over to here. So that's the explanation of our oxygen chain. Now that we had oxygen out of the way, I thought it was time to start working towards a LV circuit assembler, which is going to require MV circuits, so we need to find a way to make some diodes first. Now, the way I go about this is a little bit cheeky. The first thing I need to do is put some sphalerite in an electrolyzer. This allows me, at a very small chance, to get full piles of gallium dust. This will be needed later. We also need some arsenic, but from all the cobalt that we've been roasting in our EBF for our tools, we already have a good amount of this. Really, all we need to do is take our roasted arsenic and cook it up, and we have plenty of creosote laying around, so it's not really a huge issue. Now, we could go as far as putting it in a basic blast furnace, but I'm too lazy to Chronos for that long. Next up, we take the gallium and the arsenic that we have, and we bring it over to our EBF. We would be able to use a mixer to make this stuff, but this is the only way that we can make this right now. And after a little bit of waiting, we will end up with a gallium arsenide crystal. It takes about 60 seconds per, but they're needed for now. We then take this gallium arsenide crystal over to our only macerator in the base, at least electric one, and shred it down. We then take that gallium arsenide dust and we make small piles out of it. Those small piles are used to make the diodes. We can either use liquid glass, or in the future, we will be able to use molten polyethylene, which will allow us to get more per craft. Next up, we made some iron 3 chloride. This is made by combining hydrochloric acid and some iron dust to make the iron 3 chloride itself. We can then take our phenolitic circuit boards, some of the iron 3 chloride, and some gold foil to produce our new tier circuit board. These are all combined together to create our first 2 good electronic circuits. These are needed for the circuit assembler right now, but we'll be making more with that machine afterwards. Before I was able to actually make that machine though, I had to run to the nether to grab some Certus quartz, as it was needed for one of the crafting components, specifically the LV emitter. we needed one of these for the circuit assembler to actually make it, as it's slightly different from the regular assembler craft, so it was absolutely needed. After grabbing the rest of the necessary components, we finally had it, a basic circuit assembler. Now, the reason why this machine is more important than the rest is because it allows us to make our current and next tier circuits much cheaper. Now that we have access to cheaper MV circuits, I decided that we should probably get a few MV machines and unlock the MV chapter, so that's exactly what we did. One of the first machines that I wanted to make, if not one of the most important, was the advanced electrolyzer. This would allow us to get aluminium so much easier than we did before. It's also one of the cheapest MV machines, only requiring 2 MV circuits and no components whatsoever. One of the next quests that I want to finish is the Advanced Extruder quest. This was the second machine I ended up making, as it was pretty cheap. Now, as you saw, there was a bunch of different molds that I had to do, so I had to make a bunch of blank casts, cut them into different mold pieces, and then solidify them with steel. This was a just tedious process, but it's kind of nice, as I won't have to do this probably for a really long while. And that's that. Extruder quest is done. And now we have access to being able to make things like better Tinker's Construct parts, which can definitely be a huge upgrade to things like our hammer and pickaxe. Just look at the difference in durability here. We went from nearly 5,000 durability up to about 18,000 durability just from that tool rod alone. That's wonderful. And at this point, we ended up having a stream, and really all I did on that stream was make this new diesel setup for us. Unfortunately, the raw footage that I was also recording, it no worky. It's in the wrong encoder, and I actually have no idea how to fix it. So I'm gonna be honest with you, rather than trying to waste a lot of time to salvage that, I'll just explain to you guys how this works. You already know our light fuel setup over here, which takes our light fuel, distills it down, desulfurize it, and then that's what we were using before. Now we have this new section over here, which starts with an LV centrifuge, which takes some oil sands and turns it into heavy oil. That heavy oil is then distilled down into sulfuric heavy fuel, and it has to be desulfurized just like our light fuel does with some hydrogen. That's then passed over into this fluid tank here. This fluid tank, when it has cells inside of it, will take the fluid that's inside of it, which is this heavy fuel, and turn it into heavy fuel cells. This is part of New Horizons cell chemistry, unlike in TJ where we were just able to pipe the fluid in. But anyway, once we have the heavy fuel cells and the light fuel in here, we can mix these two together and make fuel. The reason why fuel is nice is because not only does it give us extra power per unit of fuel that we have, we also end up spending just less light fuel overall to get the amount of energy that we're looking at here, which is a wonderful change and is now being sent through our pipes to the rest of the base. If I turn on Walia here, you can see that we are now feeding fuel to more or less everything here. Our LV machines run off of fuel, our EBF runs off of fuel, so it can work permanently now. I switched the steam turbines back here away, and instead we now have a LV transformer, which comes to a advanced combustion generator. Now, some of you might wonder, wouldn't this not get enough energy due to cable loss? Well, I've also made some red alloy cable, which is this stuff here. Well, no, it's not red alloy. What we're looking for is redstone alloy. There is a big difference between the two. The redstone alloy is the LV superconductor. Red alloy is for ULV. Please don't mix them up, because if you do, you're gonna have a really, really bad time. And I almost did, but the biggest difference is that redstone alloy has to be made in an EBF, which is like your best indicator of knowing that you're making the right material. So there's this crucible, and this crucible is up on the surface because I want to make a taint biome. Why do I want to make a taint biome? Because the sky color's pretty and we're gonna make the entire base that. Oh, there's a slime. Hi. These guys occasionally spawn. They're not that bad. They're just a little problematic more than anything, but they don't actually really do a lot of damage, so it's fine. But anyway, I just come up here and I take stuff that I don't need anymore, like these high pressure solar boilers, which have gotten phased out, and I just kind of like chuck them in. And then I walk away. And then stuff happens. It's as simple as that. So let's take a quick moment to talk about what we should do next, because honestly, I'm not really sure. We have a couple of options. I could look into doing some gear upgrades and rushing down Infusion, which is in the Artifice tab. It's not unlocked yet because we haven't researched Goggles or Revealing. But anyway, we could do some Thaumcraft, or we could continue to chip away at the rest of the LV quest tab. It looks like we have a lot to do, judging by the completion number up at the top, but I'm gonna be honest with you, a lot of these are like really easy quests. I would say the most annoying ones are gonna be like these 9 over here. The rest of them are pretty manageable. Except this one. This one is a little goofy because it requires us to get a Nether Star plate, which is a Nether Star block, which is yada yada yada. You get the idea. We're gonna have to go kill 10 withers. That might be a little rough at first, but it shouldn't be too bad. What's this? I'm just not gonna look at it. Okay, so I think we'll do a little bit of both. We'll work on progressing Thaumcraft, building out a new part of the base, as we need an area for magic that's not just right in front of the pile of machines that I should already, be moving over here. So let's start doing that right now. Okay, that's gonna unlock a lot. A warp node! Sinister lodestone. Here. Nice. Yep. 6 of everything. Cool. Alright, after the Thaumcraft binge that I just went on, it's now finally time to start working on all the miscellaneous quests that are in the quest book. Now, I could go and explain every single one of them to you, but there's a lot of them. So for the time being, all the easy quests, I'm just gonna hammer through and get done now, as there's a few big ones that are going to be a much bigger problem to us than all these tiny ones that are just really a bunch of nonsensical crafting for stuff that we might not even need. Some of these quests we already had finished and we just had to unlock them. We hate better questing in this family here. It's... the prerequisite stuff is so horrible. But anyway, by the way, I got something to tell you. Man, I love warp! I love warp! Alright guys, we have an issue. A really big issue. Like a really bad issue. Okay, so let me explain. I've been slowly grinding through the quests like I told you guys I was doing. But this quest up here has made me very keen on something. I'm gonna need another star plate. I think I've explained this before already. Problem with that is the way that I was gonna get all the Wither Skeleton skulls was by making a Cursed Earth mob farm at a nether fort in the nether. To get Cursed Earth, we need to do a divination ritual using a divination sigil. One of these things, right? The thing is that you have to use an enchanting table. You see how it says, place an enchanting table on a patch of dirt or grass. There must be a clear direct line to the sky, and there must also be a large amount of dirt/grass nearby. Place 8 redstone dust in a square, yada yada yada, find an animal, kill them. You get the idea. It's basically a ritual sacrifice. The thing is we need an enchanting table. Now, there is a very rare chance of an enchanting table spawning in a roguelike dungeon, but it is very, very low. So unfortunately, I'm gonna have to do something which is not the best. Basically, we're about to open up the Thaumcraft book, and we're about to have to we're gonna have to take a lot of warp, like a dangerously high amount of warp. Our warp is already at 55, but what we're about to do is gonna make it so much worse. The enchanting table is on this page, and as you can see, there is 1, 2, 3, 4 warped researches here. And these are not easy researches, and because I've looked at the page, I have to take them. So let me grab my scribing tools real quickly and pick them up. Sure, I'll just grab the ender chest while I'm here, along with everything else. Some of them are mostly harmless. Then there's taboo. This is gonna hurt. These are gonna hurt. These are not gonna be fun. So, oh boy, here we are having to do this. Oh god. Oh no. Let me research these real quick. All right, I've researched them all up. So now remember how we were at 55 warp? Let's just pop all of these researches. These are some of the ones that I had waiting around. I just didn't do them right away on accident. So yeah, we just researched a bunch of stuff. So let's check our warp. Oh dear. That's 69 warp. Nice. Okay, anyway. Hopefully we won't have to take any more. That's a lot of warp, and that really sucks, but I mean, it's better than spending like an absurd amount of time dealing with getting wither skeleton skulls. We can start dealing with this warp here pretty soon, with sanitizing soap and spa water, or whatever it is, the bath salts. So it shouldn't be too bad. This is before I realized that I was overestimating. Now, I wasn't going to let all that warp go to waste. I wanted to get the wither skeleton skulls that were needed to summon our first wither. This is needed so we can, you know, summon in the cursed earth that we need to farm the rest of these damn guys. The fight was honestly very easy, considering that we have a lot of health and my weapon is really strong. I don't see the other ones being too bad either. But just in case things go very south, I have a devious little plan in store. Now, unfortunately, amidst all of this, I actually needed the Silky Jewel, which was back on the GregTech page, and there was more warp research, so I ended up having to do that. I decided to make some bars of soap to try to offset some of our warp gain. Unbeknownst to me, this did nothing. So, this spawned. Seems, uh-huh, yep, Oh. So don't attack it. Good to know. Good to know. Now, after nearly killing myself, my own frying pan, I decided to start making some MV machines. A bending machine, a assembler, and a fluid extractor. These are needed for a handful of things, mostly so we can go and get an enchanting table right now. But as you can see, there's items all over the place again. So I think it's time that we take a short break and work on organizing things yet again. And just like that, our base is finally cleaned up again. It's so nice to not have a messy floor anymore, as that actually destroys my frame rate a little bit. Alright, next up we're making some cursed earth here. We need this for a wither skeleton farm in the nether, so farming skulls don't take 3,000 years, as we still need another star plate to finish one of the quests in the LV chapter. I come back during the day while it's starting to burn up, just so I don't have to deal with all the mobs. Next, I take that cursed earth to the nether and set up a wither skeleton farm there, and I start farming wither skeleton skulls. Now, I'm not gonna waste your time and make you watch all of that, so let's just jump ahead to where I actually fight the withers now. Alright, so I'm gonna be doing something a little bit goofy here. I need to kill the 9 withers, but I'm too lazy to do them one at a time, so we're gonna spawn all 9 in here real quick. And then I'm gonna walk back, and then we're gonna just pop this effect real quick. Hello! Oh god. There's another wither. There's another wither dead. There's another one dead. There's another one dead. There's another. There's another. And there's another. So, yeah. That made killing the withers pretty easy. So I end up coming back home and eating a terrorwort to get rid of that horrible nausea effect. I still have those absurd buffs for about an hour, which I'm not going to really do anything special with. But that was quite poetic, getting extremely drunk and killing 9 withers. Anyway, that allows us to make the nether star plate that we need for this stupid dolly quest. Now that we got one of the worst quests out of the way, I decided to treat myself by making some mana steel tools. These will last us for an absurdly long time, and I will probably have them for who knows how long, actually. So remember how I said one of the worst quests? Keyword one of? Yeah, so there is one that is, I would reckon, almost as bad, if not worse, than that god-awful Diamond Dolly Nether Star Plate fiasco. And it's this one right here. This butane propane quest. Whoever put this on this page, I hope you step on a pile of Legos and then fall in it. Because this is horrible. Ooh, what? Who made this? Anyway, let the rant begin. Basically, we have to take some oil product. In my case, I chose heavy fuel, and hydrocrack it with 6 buckets of hydrogen per process. That then turns into 800 millibuckets of extremely hydrocracked fuel goop or whatever. Basically, we end up taking that, where is it? It's somewhere on this page. Somewhere. It's around here somewhere. Severely hydrocracked heavy fuel. We take this and we get 30 liters of propane from it. This quest wants 32 buckets. What psychopath put this on the LV page? I know that they're making it for the premise of like, oh, but you can use LPG for power or something, and it's like, whoa, this is so inefficient. Do not do this. Do not try making this. In fact, if you make this, I feel sorry for you, because this, I was like, okay, I'll just get one more quest done, he said. It's been 5 hours and I only have one half of the quest done, which is the butane. I'm still waiting on the propane, and I ran out of hydrogen because all of my hydrogen is coming from burning sodium hydroxide by just, converting it, getting the hydrogen, and then just trashing the hydroxides. This entire quest is making me irrationally angry and makes me want to say not nice things on camera. So, you know what? I'm gonna go finish up this quest, and you guys just, you don't get to experience any of this pain because I'm gonna save you from it. Please don't do this quest. At all. Don't. Whoever suggested that this should be on the LV page, shame on you. Oh my god, this quest is over. Off. Ah, that was so bad. Now that that awful quest is out of the way, I take all of the cells that I got and start to centrifuge them down into LPG, as the next quest that's unlocked requests 66 buckets of the stuff. Thankfully, it took nowhere near as long as the first quest, which is honestly a relief because I was going insane at this point. It was like 6 a.m. in the morning and I haven't slept yet. I also ended up buying enough Damascus steel to finish the Damascus steel quest after macerating it all down. Now, I was sick of looking at that old distillation setup that I used for those quests. So, in a small fit of rage, I tore the whole thing down, also clearing up all the cursed wiring below. Honestly, that setup was... It left a sour taste in my mouth. I just don't know how to explain it. I then ended up using all of the stuff from that old project to make a polyethylene setup. This isn't actually wired in quite yet, but this will be compatible for all the steps. I could use naphtha in this front step, but I'm actually going to be using light fuel as we're already going to be processing it in a pretty large quantity, so I thought it was just a smart idea to steal a little bit off of the line. Yes, I know it gives me only half of what naphtha would, but for right now, I don't really care about efficiency, and you can fight me on that. Now, at this point, we finished up most of the machine quests in the quest book, bar a few, so I accepted some quests and ruined my inventory space. However, I finished up the LV Prospector, the Extra Utilities Transfer Pipe, the LV Printer quest, as well as the Fluid Canner. My video footage from this point forward was more or less me just hitting the replay button on OBS constantly, as I was up for like 20-something hours at this point doing this on the 19th. I will never do this again because holy hell, there's so much useless garbage on the LV page. Half of this stuff I won't even end up using, and it'll just be thrown in an arc furnace right after this episode ends. So remember how I mentioned that polyethylene wasn't set up yet? Well, yeah, now we need to do it, because I found a roadblock in the quest book. There is this quest here, this tiny piles like a king. This low voltage type filter requires an item filter, and the only way that we can make this is with molten polyethylene in the recipe, or raw carbon mesh, which has polyethylene in it at this step here. So no matter what way we're looking at it, we need polyethylene, and it's probably a good idea that we set this up anyway, because it allows us to make more efficient machine holes. If we go into here, you see how this is the regular crafting table recipe. If you do it in an assembler with a little bit of polyethylene, you can completely remove the needs for the plates at the top, which means you save one core material. In this case, it would be like one steel plate. For this recipe here, it's more efficient, so we should definitely set up polyethylene real quick here. Alright, so the first thing I did for the polyethylene setup is I actually reworked our diesel setup a bit. I have moved the distilleries up top with some room to add more. This is way less than what would actually supply this system, but for the sake of this looking good, we'll just keep it like this. If we need to upgrade diesel down the road, we will move this to its own dedicated area, probably next video. So I've moved the source of oil input over to here, where you can just drop off your large aluminum cells, comes over to distill, and then it goes into this chem reactor to get desulfurized using hydrogen. Next up on the absolute wild path that this contraption makes is the light fuel exits here, and it has one of two places to go. It either goes into the advanced mixer to fill up to supply our fuel line, or it will take a detour down this very convoluted lead pipe that goes down and then back up to this low voltage fluid tank thing. It has some heavy fuel in it. This is going to get removed later. It's going to be stocked with light fuel, and that gets sent into here to be steam cracked and then distilled down. We don't have a source of steam for this quite yet, but what's probably going to happen is this pipe here is going to be routed somewhere with just a tiny bit of sunlight, and this will be supplied by a single solar boiler. Even when a solar boiler calcifies, we have a couple of them over here. As you can see, it says that the maximum would be 360 liters per second. This will eventually go down to 120, just to make people familiar with this. So even just one of these at 120 liters per second would probably be far more than this system actually would ever need. And it's not like those solar boilers are expensive. If we needed more steam, we could just add more. That, or we could do a fluid heater. Honestly, we might switch to that in the future, but for now, the pipe just comes over to here and it's just waiting. Next, I had to run another lead pipe over to the second chemical reactor. This is for oxygen. I set up the solar boilers underneath, and that's pretty much it. Polyethylene is done, and we can move back to completing the LV chapter again. We can now make better resistors as well, due to the fact that we have polyethylene now. Same case with the vacuum tubes. Now that we have access to red alloy and an extractor, we can get 16 vacuum tubes per craft, rather than the 8 that we were getting before. And this helped quite a bit in regards to batch crafting a bunch of LV circuits for not only MV circuits, but for the LV machines that we have left to craft in the quest book. Now, I still need a few more LV components, so I focus on making the pumps first, as they're the most irritating to still make. These will be used for a couple of things here, specifically the steam valve, the ore washer, the advanced boiler, and the fluid interaction world thingy from Extra Utilities. I forgot what this was called off the top of my head, honestly. At this point, it was just a non-stop bullet train of random quests complete. We were doing them left and right, and none of them were really that interesting. Just craft some arbitrary item that we will never need, and then completely forget about it 3 minutes later. Though there are a couple of them here that are actually useful, like the vacuum hopper. It's good for mob farms, just like the diamond spikes are. We also had to do the rest of the oil products like sulfuric naphtha and some fertilized dirt, which I could have done forever ago, but we also had to purify the naphtha back down, which we've already done this before with the others. Now at this point, we only had 20 quests left, and they were still not too bad. I would say the most annoying would be the packager quest right around here. We will save that one for the very end. I now hammer out some of the easy ones like the overflow valve and a name tag for some Enderman quest, and then I finish up one of the annoying ones, which was getting a half a stack of methane. It wasn't as bad as LPG, so I didn't bother really going into it too much. Next up, I finished up cadmium and started to work on some of the rechargeable batteries from Industrial Craft 2. They're a little odd because they required a fluid canner, but they're needed for some of the tools that we're going to need to make here very shortly. Those tools in question are the electric tree tap and an electric hoe. I probably will use neither of these at all, and they'll sit in a chest and rot away. I'm gonna stop now. Oh my god, I'm losing my mind. It's 1 a.m. And at this point, I only had 10 quests left, and it shouldn't be too bad. We just have to do an XP shower, 2 cells, one has mercury, one has sulfuric acid. 2 quests are for ore veins, where I know the location of both of them, so they'll be very easy to hammer out. And then this other one here is nitrogen, and then the extra utility stuff. These ones aren't too bad either. In fact, I believe the nitrogen is more or less going to be finished here once I centrifuge up some of this lovely air cells. We just get a bunch of stuff from it. The rest of this stuff was really simple. The ore quests were just go there and mine it up, so it wasn't really that difficult. The transfer nodes were cheap. I would say the world upgrade was a little weird, mainly because it just took diamond rods. So while those were going on, I was just collecting a bunch of other random stuff to mark off the remaining quests. We also finally got the node upgrade quest and finally have a nature's compass. And just like that, guys, we have the entire LV chapter completed now. The challenge is over. We're finished with the LV age and all the episodes related challenges. I'm so happy that I got this done, even though there were some rough patches with some questionable quests. I honestly think that this was a really fun challenge. I probably won't do it next episode or have it in the vote pool, considering doing it back to back will definitely ruin its touch. I think we should do it when there's funny quests more often than not. Now, one thing that I would like to mention is that I've been doing YouTube for exactly a year now. And I know in this video I said before that we hit about 5,000 subscribers. I just want to say again, thank you so much to everyone who's been following my journey. And I also want to give a huge thanks to the people who support me over on Twitch and on Patreon. I couldn't really do this, guys, without you. So thank you so much. Until the next episode, I'll see you around. Bye-bye. It is 4 a.m. I'm gonna go to sleep now.